The reservation was under a name Nora Bellamy did not recognize, at a restaurant she could not afford, on the warmest evening of the summer so far, and she stood on the far side of the glass for a full minute before she made herself go in. Inside, the light was the color of melted butter. Marchetti's took up the corner of the block where the avenue softened into the old theater district, and through the window she could see white cloths and low candle flame and a long bar of dark stone where the ice in the glasses caught the gold and threw it back. A man in a linen jacket, the price of her month's rent, was laughing at something. A woman set down a fork as though it weighed nothing, as though forks were free, as though everything in her life had always been free. Nora pressed her thumb against the small fold of bills in her pocket. $60, counted twice on the bus, and thought, not for the first time that day, that her sister had finally found a way to make a fool of her in a setting expensive enough to remember. "He's an artist," Sloane had said on the phone that morning, in the bright voice she used when she was enjoying herself at someone's expense. "A musician. Very soulful. You'll have so much in common, you and your little art center and your hand-me-down idealism. Marchetti's, 8 o'clock. Wear the green if you still have it." A pause, glossy and deliberate. "And Nora? Be nice to him. He doesn't have much." Be nice to him. He doesn't have much. As if Nora needed to be reminded to be kind to people with empty pockets. As if that had not been the whole architecture of her childhood. She knew exactly what her sister was doing. Sloane had picked a man with nothing and a place with everything and set them on a collision so she could stand somewhere nearby with her perfect manicure curled around a glass and watch her soft dreamer sister flounder through a bill she'd have to dodge. The cruelty of it was so familiar it was almost comfortable, like a draft in a house you grew up in. She went in anyway. She always went in. The host knew her name before she gave it, which she put down to the reservation. "Miss Bellamy, you're with the gentleman at the back." He said it carefully, the way you'd hand someone a cup that was too full, and led her past the bar and the laughing linen jacket to a table half tucked under a stair where the candlelight had to work harder. And there he was, the broke musician. He stood when he saw her, which surprised her, and the standing was the first thing she liked about him. He wore a jacket that had been good once, and had been worn past good, and then past that. The cuffs gone soft, one button replaced with a near match that didn't quite. Against the leg of his chair leaned a guitar case held shut with a luggage strap because the latch had given up. He had dark hair pushed back without product, a few days past a haircut, and a face that didn't perform for her. No bright restaurant smile, no quick read of her shoes and her bag and her worth. Just a steady, almost wary attention, as if he had come expecting one thing and was recalibrating for another. "Nora," he said. "That's me." She sat before he could come around to pull her chair, because a man with a strapped-shut guitar case did not need to spend his evening performing a gallantry that cost money to look natural. "He must be the soulful one. My sister was very firm about the soulful." "Was she?" Something moved at the corner of his mouth and put itself away. "I'm Leo." "Leo." She let it settle. "Okay. Hi, Leo." A young waiter arrived with water and 2 menus, and Nora watched Leo's hand go very still on the table when the menus came, the way her own hand used to go still. And her heart did the thing it always did, the thing Sloane mocked her for, the soft thing. She did the math fast and ugly the way the poor learn to. $60, a place like this, a man who flinched at a menu. She made a decision before the waiter had finished pouring. "I should tell you," she said lightly, opening her menu so he'd open his. "I had a huge lunch. Enormous. I'm basically here for the company, and possibly one very small appetizer that I will absolutely insist on getting for us to share, because I'm told it's rude to come to a place like this and only drink water. Though between you and me, I would happily only drink water." She turned the menu a quarter so he could see she was looking at the left side. The cheap side. The side a person looked at when $60 had to cover 2. "The bread's free. I checked. Always check. He looked at her for a moment that went on slightly too long. Always check, he repeated. My father's one piece of financial advice. That and never trust a man who orders for you. She smiled. You're not going to order for me, are you, Leo? I would not dare. Good. We'll get along. The waiter, his name tag said Theo, and he was young enough that the job was clearly newer than his nerves, hovered, and Leo glanced up at him and said, Give us a few minutes. And there it was. The first thing Nora noticed and filed under nothing. Theo didn't nod the way a waiter nods. He nodded the way a person nods to someone they answer to, a small straightening of the spine, a quick, of course, with a beat of deference under it, that didn't belong to a table of two splitting an appetizer. She thought, he must be sweet to the staff. That's nice. That's a green flag, even on a broke man. Especially on a broke man. She had no idea that was the thing she would turn over later, in the dark, again and again. She had absolutely no idea, and across the small table, watching her decide to protect his dignity with her $60, Leo Marchetti had every idea in the world, and chose to say nothing at all. The first hour was easier than it had any right to be. He asked her about the arts center, and she told him. A long, low building 2 neighborhoods over, donated piano with 3 dead keys, a guitar program for kids whose schools had cut music, a wait list because there were always more kids than instruments. He didn't do the thing people did, the slow, sympathetic nod that was really relief at not being involved. He asked which keys were dead. He asked whether the kids preferred the old songs or the new ones. He asked, leaning in, what it sounded like when 12 children who could not yet play all tried to play at once. And when she told him, like a beautiful catastrophe, like a washing machine full of bells, he laughed, a real one, surprised out of him, and put a hand briefly over his own mouth, as if he'd misplaced the laugh and was startled to find it. You really are a musician, she said. Only a musician would ask about the dead keys. Which ones are dead matters, he said. A song avoids them, or it doesn't. My father used to say that. It came out before she'd decided to let it. She turned her water glass a quarter turn on the cloth, watched the candlelight slide around the rim. Not about pianos. About people, mostly. Rooms. He played the bad bars, the ones that didn't pay, and he'd come home at 2 a.m. and sit on the end of my bed and say, You learn where the dead notes are, and you build the song around them. He meant the rent, I think. He meant us. She caught herself. Sorry, that's a lot of dead father for an appetizer. It's not too much. Most people think it's too much. Most people, said Leo, are afraid of the cheap side of the menu in every possible sense. He said it without heat, turning something small over in his fingers below the table, a habit she'd notice later and not understand yet. What happened to him? He died when I was 17. Sloane was 20. She kept her voice level, the way you keep a tray level on a moving bus. He left us a guitar with a warped neck, a box of records nobody would buy, and the firm conviction that you can't price a person. My sister took one lesson from that, and I took the opposite one, and we've been arguing about it ever since, mostly without speaking. She made herself smile. You met her, sort of. The soulful brief. She's the one who thinks I'm here being charitable to a starving artist. She watched it land. Watched a man with a strapped-shut guitar case absorb the word starving and not flinch. Just take it, the way you take a coin pressed on you by someone who can't spare it, with both hands, carefully. And she liked him more, and had no idea she had just told the owner of the room exactly how to break her heart. And what do you think you're doing? He asked. Right now, with me, if your sister's wrong. Nora considered it honestly, because he'd asked it honestly. I think I'm having dinner with a man who stood up when I came in, she said, which nobody's done in a while, and who hasn't once looked at my shoes. She tore a piece of the free bread. "The bread is excellent, by the way. Don't tell the kitchen I said so. It'll go to their heads and then they'll start charging." "They'd never," said Leo gravely, who set the prices, and something passed over his face that she read as a poor man's pride, and was in fact a rich man's terror. The dawning awareness that he did not want this to be the only dinner. They ordered the one small appetizer she'd promised to insist on, and she did insist, and he let her, watching her with that recalibrating attention. The plate that came was not small, and was not one appetizer. It was a spread. Olives and warm bread and a little dish of something golden, 3 of everything. And Nora opened her mouth to say there'd been a mistake, and Leo said, very evenly, "They do that here, end of the night, things that won't keep. They'd only throw it out." Which was a lie, a clean one, delivered without a flicker, and Theo set it down and did not contradict it. And Nora, who had eaten a great many end-of-the-night things in her life and knew exactly how generous a kitchen had to be to call this that, felt something warm and uncomfortable open in her chest, because she thought this broke, kind man had spent a connection he probably couldn't afford to make sure she ate. She had it precisely backward. She would not learn that for weeks. "So what do you play?" she asked, around the bread. "Guitar, some piano, whatever the room needs." "The room?" She tilted her head. "You play here?" A pause, very small. "Sometimes. Late. When it's quiet." "For tips?" "Something like that." "Then I hope someone tips you well," she said, and meant it so plainly that he had to look down at his water. She found out, near the end, what the place cost. Not from the bill. The bill never came, and she'd been bracing for it the whole night. $60 folded sweaty in her pocket, the math running under everything. But from the table beside them, where the linen jacket and his free fork woman stood to leave, and she heard him say the number to his companion with the lightness of a man for whom it was a rounding error. Nora's stomach dropped clean through the floor. It was 4 times what she had. It was more than 4 times. She had been splitting an appetizer in a room where the appetizers cost what she made in 2 days of teaching children to find middle C, and the bill still didn't come. Theo cleared the plates and refilled the water and did not bring it. Leo talked on about a record he loved, watching her, and Nora understood with a hot rush of shame that he had arranged for there to be no bill, that the broke musician had called in some last favor, some friend in the kitchen, to spare them both, and that she was sitting here, letting a man with a strapped-shut guitar case absorb the cost of an evening her sister had designed to humiliate her. She would not let it stand. She had never in her life let it stand. When Theo passed, she caught his sleeve, gentle. "Hey, Theo." She had the bills already out of her pocket, folded small, warm from her body, every dollar she'd brought. I don't know how it's settled here, but this is for you. Just you. For your night." $60. In the hand of a boy, in a place where a single dinner cost more. "You were lovely to us. People aren't always lovely back. So." She pressed it into his palm and closed his fingers over it before he could do the wide-eyed math of how much it was, relative to her dress, her bag, the cheap side of the menu she'd been reading all night. "Don't argue. My father waited tables. You take care of each other, or nobody does." Theo's mouth opened. He looked, and this was the second thing, the thing she filed under nothing. He looked not at the money, but at Leo. Fast. A question. And Leo gave him something with his eyes that Nora's back was turned to, and Theo closed his hand and said low, "Thank you, Miss Bellamy," and went. When she turned back, the broke musician was looking at her as though she had reached across the table and rearranged something structural in his chest. "What?" she said. "Nothing," said Leo Marchetti, who owned the floor under her chair, and the chair, and the building, and a good part of the street outside the window, and who had just watched a woman with $60 to her name give all 60 to one of his waiters, out of a kindness so total it did not even pause to check whether she could afford it. Nothing. You'd better let me walk you to your bus. He carried his strapped-shut guitar case under his arm and walked her into the warm summer dark. And at the corner, under a streetlight humming with moths, she shook his hand because she didn't know what else to do. And his hand was warm and a little rough at the fingertips. Guitar calluses, she thought, the genuine article. And he said, "Can I see you again?" Not as a question. And she said, "I'd like that. But Leo, only places that are free. I mean it. I had a wonderful time and I will never set foot in that restaurant again as long as I live." And he laughed, helplessly, the second real laugh of the night, and said, "Deal." And Nora got on the bus, thinking she had just had the best, worst-laid plan of her sister's life. And Leo stood on his own corner, outside his own restaurant, watching the bus pull away, and did not move for a long time. He did not sleep that night. He stood at the tall windows of the apartment that took the whole top floor. Too much glass, too much quiet. The summer city laid out below him like a circuit board. He turned a guitar pick over and over across his knuckles and tried to make himself feel the thing he was supposed to feel, which was caution. He was very good at caution. He had built it the way other men built fortunes. In his case, the two had grown together. He had learned it at 23, when the woman he was going to marry had cried in his arms about her father's debts, and he had quietly cleared them, and had learned a year later that the debts were invented, and so, it turned out, with a tear. The only true thing in the whole arrangement had been his money, which was the one thing about him she had ever wanted. He had learned it from his own father, gone now, who had taught him with the patience of a man teaching a trade that there were two kinds of people, the kind who counted what you were worth, and the kind who pretended not to, and that the second kind was simply better at it. Marchetti men do not get fooled twice, his father liked to say. We get fooled once, and we build a wall. So he had built the wall. He owned the restaurant and the label that had started in its basement, and half the block it stood on. And he had learned that the surest way to find out what a person was made of was to take the money out of the room. He played the late sets in the worn jacket, not as a disguise, exactly, but as a test he ran on the world, a small, honest experiment. This is who I am with nothing on. Watch how they treat the nobody. He had run the test on 100 people, and it had told him, every time, exactly what he expected to hear, which was a kind of company, even when it was bad news. He had not expected Nora Bellamy. He had taken the date, God help him, out of something close to spite. Her sister came to Marchetti's twice a week and treated the floor like a runway and the staff like furniture. And 3 weeks ago she had stopped him on his way through with his guitar, mistaking him entirely, looking him up and down with the frank contempt she reserved for the help, and had said, in a voice pitched to be overheard, "You, musician, do you do private things? Dates, I mean. I have a sister." And she had laughed to her friends about it, about her hopeless, soft sister, who'd never land anyone with money, who'd probably love a starving guitar player. Wouldn't that be perfect? Wouldn't that be just exactly right? He had said yes. All right, he'd said, the wall already deciding, because he had wanted, with a cold curiosity, to see the sister. To watch the soft, hopeless one fail the test the way everyone failed the test. Instead, she had read the cheap side of the menu so he wouldn't have to read it alone. She had lied about a huge lunch. She had given a boy from the kitchen every dollar in her pocket and told him to take care of his own. And she had made Leo promise to only ever take her places that were free, and the wall, which had survived a fiancé and a father and a decade of people who counted, had not so much fallen as simply failed to find anything to defend against. The honest thing would have been to tell her. He knew that, standing at the glass with the pick going over his knuckles. The honest thing would have been to say, on the corner under the moths, "Nora, before you get on that bus, this is mine, all of it, and I let you give your last $60 to my waiter, and I'm sorry." He had opened his mouth to do it, and then she had said, Only places that are free, I mean it, with her whole shining face. And he had understood that the moment he told her, the test would be over forever. She would know. And he could never again be sure, not really, not in the deep place where his father's voice still lived, whether the warmth was for him or for the Empire. She was the first person in 10 years to be kind to the nobody. If he told her the truth, he would lose the only proof he had ever been given that the nobody was worth being kind to. So he said nothing. He told himself it was for a few days. He told himself he would tell her at the right moment, when it was safe, when he was sure. He was a man who had built half a block on his judgment, and he could not see, that first sleepless night, that he had already made the one decision that would cost him everything, and that he had made it for the most human and least defensible reason in the world. He wanted, just a little longer, to be loved with empty pockets. The right moment did not come, because she made everything so easy that nothing felt like a moment. She took him at his word about free. Their second meeting was a Tuesday in the park where the city ran an outdoor piano program in summer, 3 upright pianos chained under the plane trees for anyone to play, and Nora played badly and gloriously, and made him play, and he sat down at the chained upright with its yellowed keys and its E that buzzed, and he played as if he were apologizing to it, gently, finding the buzz and going around it, and Nora went quiet beside him in a way she had not gone quiet at dinner. "You're not a tip musician," she said when he stopped. His hands didn't move on the keys. "No?" "No. People who play for tips play louder than that." She was looking at his profile. "You play like you're talking to it." "It has a dead key," he said. "You go around it." "Which ones are dead matters," she said, giving him his own line back. And he turned and looked at her. And the park went a little unreal at the edges, and a kid skated past, trailing a speaker playing something with too much bass. And the moment, which had been about to become a different kind of moment, laughed itself off instead. Which was, he would think later, the truest mercy she ever did him. That she let the big things arrive sideways, in their own time, never forced. He worried about money in front of her, because that was the part he was playing, and because, and this was the part that frightened him, it was the part of the lie that felt closest to true. When she fretted that he'd taken the afternoon off and lost the hours, he heard himself say, "It's fine, I know a guy," with a shrug, and she laughed. "You know a guy?" "I know a few guys." "Leo, you cannot solve being broke with guys." "You'd be amazed what you can solve with guys," he said. And it was the closest thing to a confession he would let himself make for weeks. And she took it as a joke, which it was, and as a bit of charming bravado from the man with nothing, which it wasn't, and "I know a guy" became theirs. When the art center's donated piano lost a 4th key, she said, mournful, "I don't suppose you know a guy?" And he said, "I might know a guy." And 3 days later, a piano tuner she had never called appeared at the center, paid in advance by a name the front desk couldn't quite read, and refused payment and would not be argued with, and tuned all 88 keys, including the 4 dead ones, until they weren't dead anymore, and left. Nora stood in the music room afterward, with her hand on the warm wood and her eyes stinging, and could not for the life of her work out who would do such a thing, and decided it must have been a grant she'd forgotten applying for. Because the alternative, that a broke musician had somehow impossibly found a way, was too much to hold. It was him, of course. He told the tuner, "Don't say my name." It cost him nothing, and it was the most careful spending he had ever done. Maggie noticed first, because Maggie noticed everything. She had run the floor at Marchetti's since before it was Leo's, since it was his father's, and then briefly no one's, and then his. And she had buried 2 of his illusions personally, and had no intention of attending the funeral of a 3rd. "There's a girl," she said, not a question, refilling the bar caddy with the unhurried competence of a woman who had seen every kind of man come through her room, and be wrong about every kind of thing. There's a friend, said Leo. Maggie wedged the lemons in. And does the friend know she's dating the lease on the building she's standing in, or are we doing the other thing? The thing we swore on your father's grave we would not do again? Maggie. Because the other thing, Maggie went on, serene, ended last time with a young woman crying very expensively in this dining room, and you not playing the guitar for 8 months. And I had to listen to the silence, Leo. I'm the one who has to be here for the silence. She set down the caddy. Tell the girl. I will. When? When it's the right time. There is no right time to tell someone you've let them think you're poor, Maggie said, with the flat certainty of scripture. There's only earlier, which is bad, and later, which is worse. She picked up the caddy and moved off down the bar, and over her shoulder, dry as the Dregret she was predicting, she gave Theo $60. The boys put it in a frame. He won't spend it. You've got a religious relic going around behind the line because of this girl, and you're waiting for the right time. He did not tell her. He kept meaning to and not doing it, the way a person keeps meaning to look at the thing that frightens them. And the summer went warm and long, and the not telling became a country they lived in together, where only he knew the borders. When he answered the phone one June evening, sounding stuffed up and far away, she made soup. She did not announce it. She simply got off the phone, looked at the $4 and change in the jar on her counter, walked to the corner market for an onion and a carrot and a wing of chicken, and built a pot of the thin, bright soup her father had made on the nights the gigs didn't pay, the kind you stretch with water and salt, and the kind words you say while you stir it. Then she put it in a thermos and got on the bus across the whole city to an address Leo gave her with a hesitation she misread as embarrassment about the building, and which was in fact a man rapidly deciding to meet her 3 blocks from the building he actually lived on top of. He was waiting on the steps of a brownstone that was not his, in the worn jacket, looking genuinely unwell and genuinely undone, because he had not in his adult life had anyone bring him soup, and did not have a single learned response for it. She sat him down on the step and made him drink it from the thermos cup in the warm summer dusk while the streetlights came on, and he drank it, and his eyes did something, and she pretended not to see, because some things you let arrive sideways. You shouldn't have come all this way, he said. On the bus, for soup. It's not about the soup, she said. Nobody ever thinks it's about the soup. It's about somebody knowing where the dead notes are. She screwed the cup back on. You sounded like a man who eats standing up over a sink. I know the sound. I invented the sound. He laughed, which made him cough, and she thumped him between the shoulder blades with the flat of her hand, brisk and unsentimental, the way you do for someone you've decided to keep. And Leo Marchetti, who could have had a private doctor at the brownstone steps inside 11 minutes, sat in the dark and let a woman with $4 in a jar take care of him, and understood with a quiet, falling sensation that he was in very serious trouble, and that it was the best trouble he had ever been in. He worried about money in front of her, because that was the part he was playing, and one evening it almost cost him, because she caught the seam. They were on a bench by the river, the free bench, watching the free water, and his jacket button had finally surrendered, the near-match one, and it rolled off into the dark, and she went after it on her knees and found it, and came up triumphant, and then frowned at the jacket itself, at the cuffs gone soft, at the lining where the silk, and it was silk, good silk, the kind that doesn't fray like that unless it started very fine, had worn through to show what it had been. This was a beautiful jacket, she said slowly, turning the cuff. Once. Leo, this is really good cloth. This cost somebody a fortune. For one heartbeat, the whole summer hung on the next sentence, and Leo, who lied for a living now, gave her the truest lie he had. It was my father's, he said. He had one good jacket. He wore it to everything. The bank when he was begging the bank, the church when he was burying his own father, the one nice dinner a year. All true. He simply let her think the dinners were the exception and not the air the family breathed. I wear it out on purpose. It's the only thing of his I kept. And Nora, who had a guitar with a warped neck and a box of unsellable records, who understood the religion of the one kept thing better than anyone alive, stopped frowning and took out her travel sewing kit and said, "Then we keep it properly," and bent her head over the wandering button on the bench in the river dark, frowning, biting the thread, and he sat very still under her hands and looked at the top of her bent head and thought he had never owned anything in his life as valuable as the 4 minutes it took her to mend a button she believed he could not afford to have mended. And he did not correct a single word. And that was the night the lie stopped being a wall and started being a home. She introduced him to the kids as, "My friend Leo, who's a real musician." And he came on Thursdays, and the Thursdays became the truest hours of his week. There were a dozen of them, 8 and 9 and 10, with a mismatched fleet of donated guitars, too big for their bodies, and Leo, who had produced records that sold in the millions, knelt on the linoleum and taught them the same 3 chords for 6 weeks running, and the dignity of a clean change between them. Not faster, he told them. Better. Anybody can play fast. It's the change between 2 true notes that takes a whole life. There was a small, ferocious girl named Priya, who held her guitar like a weapon and demanded to know why they couldn't play a real song yet. And Leo, instead of soothing her, took her seriously, the way no one took children seriously, and said, "Because a real song is just 3 chords you're not embarrassed by anymore. And you're still embarrassed." And Priya scowled at him for a full week, and then came back, having practiced until her fingertips peeled, and played the change between G and C so cleanly that the room went quiet. And Leo said, "There, that's a real song. Everything else is just more of that." And Priya declared him, on the spot, the best teacher in the world, and meant it, with the total conviction of the young. Leo Marchetti, who had a wall of gold records in a hallway across town that no child had ever seen, found that he would have traded the wall for Priya's verdict without a flicker, and went home that night and stood in front of the gold records for a long time. And for the first time, they looked to him like what they were, which was a very expensive way of measuring whether strangers liked the song, when there was a 9-year-old 2 neighborhoods over who would tell you to your face for free. Their dates were free, because she'd made him promise, and the free city turned out to be the better city. They rode the ferry back and forth at dusk for the price of nothing, because the return trip was free if you didn't get off. And they didn't get off. 3 crossings in the gold light, with the skyline sliding by. And Nora pointed out a building and said her father had played a wedding on the roof of it once, terribly drunk on the open bar, and it was the happiest she'd ever seen him. And Leo looked at the building, which he in fact owned, and said nothing, and filed it away as a thing he would quietly make right someday, and never tell her. They went to the Free Friday at the museum and stood in front of a painting of a poor family at a table, and Nora said the thing she'd told no one, which was that she was afraid sometimes, that she'd built her whole self around being proud of having nothing, because it was the only thing she'd been handed enough of to be proud of. And what if it was just a story she told, to keep from wanting more? And Leo, who had everything, and had built his whole self around being unfoolable, looked at the painted family and said, "Wanting more isn't the sin your sister thinks it is. The sin is forgetting what the more is for." And Nora looked at him sideways and said, "You're suspiciously wise for a man who can't keep a button on." And he said, "I contain multitudes." And she laughed, and the inside joke that had started with, "I know a guy," grew a second floor, because now whenever Leo said anything that sounded too polished, she'd squint and say, "Multitudes," and he'd duck his head, and only he knew how close to the bone she was scraping every single time. They were happy. That was the trouble with it, looking back. They were so quietly, ordinarily happy, on free Tuesdays and mended benches, that the lie stopped feeling like a wall and started feeling like a home. And a man can defend a wall forever, but he cannot bear to knock down a home. Sloane re-entered the story the way weather does, all at once and from the wrong direction. And the first thing Nora saw was a thing she did not understand and tucked away to understand later. Nora had not told her sister the date had gone anywhere, because she had learned long ago to keep the things she loved out of Sloane's reach, where they couldn't be priced and found wanting. But the city is small at the top, and Sloane lived at the top. And one Saturday afternoon she came to the arts centre unannounced, to confirm a rumour Nora would realise later, to see with her own eyes whether the joke had taken root. Nora came up the back corridor with a box of restrung guitars and stopped in the doorway of the music room because Sloane was there, alone, and did not know she was watched. She was standing in front of the donated piano, the one the mystery tuner had healed, with one hand flat on the closed lid, and she was not posing, not checking her reflection in the dark window the way she always did, not performing for anyone. She was just standing there, with her hand on the piano and her head bowed, and her shoulders were doing something her shoulders never did in public, a small caving in, a private weather. On the music stand was a photograph one of the kids had propped there, an old one Nora had brought in months ago, their father, Walter, young and laughing behind a cheap guitar on a stage no bigger than a door. Sloane was looking at it. And then she reached out and turned it face down, gently, the way you'd close the eyes of someone sleeping, and stood with her hand on the back of it, and Nora stepped back from the doorway because some grief is not yours to walk in on, and set the box down quietly, and waited a full 5 minutes by the front desk before she came back, loudly, so her sister could rebuild her face in time. She said nothing about it. She did not know what it meant. She would. A week later, Sloane came back, and this time she came as herself, the public one, the verdict giver, and the doomed thing between the sisters finally collided. She swept into the music room in heels not built for its linoleum, trailing a cloud of perfume and a fiancé named Preston, who had the soft, expensive face of a man who had never once checked whether the bread was free. And she found her sister with a worn, jacketed man bent over a guitar, surrounded by children. And her face did a complicated thing. "Oh," said Sloane. "Oh, this is still happening. The musician." She said musician the way you'd say head lice. "Nora, a word." In the hall, under the buzzing fluorescent, Sloane delivered the verdict Nora had been braced for since she was 9. "I set you up with him as a joke," she said, not even bothering to lower her voice all the way. "You understand that, don't you? It was funny. The starving artist and you, with your little kids and your big heart. It was supposed to be one bad night you'd laugh about later. I didn't think you'd keep him, like a stray." She glanced back toward the music room, toward Leo's bent head. "He has nothing, Nora. Nothing. You're going to be 30 in a building with no heat, married to a man who plays for change in a restaurant he can't afford to eat in. You're going to be—" And here Sloane stopped, just short of the name, but Nora heard it anyway, heard it land in the old wound with the precision of a key in a lock. "You're going to be Dad." "His name is Leo," Nora said quietly, and she did not raise her voice, and she did not reach for the cruelty that was right there, the photograph turned face down on the music stand, the proof that her sister grieved the same man in secret. She kept it. It was hers to keep. "And the worst thing about you, Sloane, isn't that you tried to humiliate me. It's that you really believe a man's only worth what's in his pockets. You believe that all the way down. And I'm sorry for you. I really am. Because it means you've never once been loved in a way you could trust." It was the wrong thing to say to win, and the right thing to say to be true. And Sloane's lovely face went white and then hard, and she said, "We'll see," in a voice with a blade in it, and gathered Preston and her perfume, and retreated. Not defeated, only routed for the day, going home to think. And Nora stood in the hall, shaking, not knowing she had just handed her sister the only motive she needed, to go and find out exactly who Leo was. Because Sloane Bellamy could not bear to be told she was wrong about money, and there was only one way left to prove herself right. The pressure that proved her did not come from Sloane. It came on a Tuesday night in a fluorescent municipal room, and Leo saw all of it. And it was the night he stopped being able to pretend the lie was harmless. The Arts Center leased its low building from the city for $1 a year, a deal struck a decade ago and resented ever since by a councilman named Hargrove, who had a developer's offer on the block and a tidy argument that a music program serving 40 children was not the highest use of public land. The lease came up for renewal at the community board in public session, and Nora had 3 minutes at a microphone against a man with a slide deck and a $250,000 promise to the Parks Fund. She had not slept. She wore the green. She brought Priya. Leo came because she asked him to, and sat in the back in the worn jacket among the parents in the folding chairs, and watched the councilman explain, reasonably, warmly, the way the dangerous ones always do, that everyone loved music, but that love did not fix a roof, and that the city had a responsibility to its taxpayers, and that surely the children could be bused to a facility across the river. And the room nodded the slow nod of people being talked out of something they could not afford to lose. Then Nora stood up. She did not have a slide deck. She had a folder she didn't open. "Councilman Hargrove is right that love doesn't fix a roof," she said, and the room shifted, because that was not how the soft ones were supposed to start. "He's right that 40 children isn't a lot. He's right that there's a better offer on the table. There's always a better offer on the table. That's what a table is for." She let it sit. The fluorescent hummed. Somebody's chair creaked. "My father played music his whole life and died with nothing. And the lesson my family took from that was that he wasted it. That art is what you do until you grow up and start counting. I believed a version of that for a long time. And then I started teaching kids whose schools cut the music first. Always first. Because music is what you cut when you've decided a child's job is to be useful and not to be a person. And I watched what happens to a 9-year-old when you hand her the one thing in her week that nobody's grading and nobody can repossess." She turned, and she did the unforgivable, generous thing. She did not point at Priya, did not parade her. "There's a girl in this program who couldn't look an adult in the eye in September. Ask her teachers. I'm not going to make her stand up because she's not a prop and this isn't a telethon. But she changed the bar chord she couldn't play into a song, by herself, through nothing but the refusal to be embarrassed anymore. And I've watched that refusal walk out of this building and into her schoolwork and her spine. You cannot put that on a slide. It doesn't fix a roof. It fixes the kid who's going to fix the roof in 20 years, if anybody's left who thinks she's worth more than the land she's standing on." She closed the unopened folder and picked up her bag. "Renew the lease. Or don't, and explain to 40 families why the better offer is always somebody else's. That's my 3 minutes. I have children to get home." She sat down in a silence that had teeth, and a parent started clapping, and then the room did, and the councilman's slide deck went on glowing behind him, saying nothing anybody believed anymore. And the board tabled the developer's offer for 90 days pending review, which, in the slow grammar of municipal cowardice, meant she had won. Leo did not clap. Leo sat very still in the back of the room with his hands gripping his own knees, because he had just watched a woman with $60 and a warped neck guitar do, with 3 unbought minutes, the thing he had spent a decade and half a block trying to buy, make a room full of strangers value the thing that couldn't be priced. And he understood, with a cold, clean horror, that he had a folder of his own, that he could have ended Hargrove with 1 phone call, that he owned the developer's lender and 3 of the people on the board, and could have made the whole crisis vanish before it reached a microphone, and that doing so would have robbed her of exactly this, the proof, standing on her own legs, that she was right. He had not done it. He had sat on his hands and let her fight, which was either the most loving restraint of his life or the final proof that he was a coward who would not put down the wall even to lift the woman he loved. and he could no longer tell which. And that not knowing was the beginning of the end of his ability to keep the secret. Afterward, on the steps in the warm dark, Priya asleep against her mother in a parked car, Nora was shaking with adrenaline, and Leo took both her cold hands in his roughened ones and didn't say, "Good job," didn't say, "I'm proud of you," said instead, low, "Where did you learn to do that?" And Nora laughed, wrung out, and said, "Bad bars, watching my father lose rooms. You learn where the dead notes are." And Leo, who had every resource on earth and had used none of them, said, "Remind me to never get in a room against you." And she said, "You couldn't afford the ticket," teasing, the old joke, and it went into him like a blade he'd sharpened himself. The glimpse came the next Sunday, and it was the happiest morning of Nora's life, which is how she would know, afterward, exactly what she had lost. He told her he was minding a friend's rooftop garden, watering it, he said, for a guy, while the guy was away, and could she come up? It was free, and it was green, and the city looked unreal from there. It was, of course, his own roof. The too-much-glass apartment 1 floor down. The garden he'd had built, and never once sat in, because there had been no one to sit in it with. But that Sunday morning, it was just a borrowed roof, and a thermos of coffee, and the whole summer city laid out gold and hazy below them. And Nora sat on a low wall in his too big borrowed sweater, barefoot, and watched him water tomato plants badly, and felt the specific, impossible peace of a future arriving on schedule. "My friend has terrible technique," she observed. "You're drowning the basil." "My friend's a busy man." "Your friend has a guy for everything except his own basil." She tucked her knees up. "Leo, can I say a thing without you getting strange about it?" He went still with the watering can, the way he went still when something mattered. "You can say a thing." "I keep catching myself doing the future." She said it to the skyline, not to him, because some things you let arrive sideways. Like, I'll think, next summer we'll do the ferry at night when it's actually warm, or Priya's recital is in the fall and you'll come. And I've never done the future with anybody. I do the present really well. The present is free. She finally looked at him. "And I just want you to know that I know exactly what you are. You're a man with nothing, and a borrowed roof, and a guy for everything. And I've done the math, all of it. The no-heat math, the two broke people math, and I want the future anyway. I want it with the version of you that drowns the basil. So, that's the thing. You can get strange about it now, and Leo Marchetti, standing on his own roof he'd let her think was borrowed, holding a watering can over basil he was in fact killing, looked at a woman who had just chosen, eyes open, the poorest version of him she could imagine, and felt the lie close over his head like water. Because there was no version of the future she'd just described that survived the truth. And he knew it. And he could not make himself say it. Not on that gold morning. Not with her barefoot in his sweater, doing the future out loud for the first time in her life. So he set down the watering can and crossed the roof and held her. And over her shoulder, the city he owned glittered like an accusation. And he said the only true thing he could afford. "I want it too. The whole future. More than I've wanted anything." Which she took as a poor man's promise, and which was a rich man's surrender, and which was the last wholly happy moment either of them would have for a long time. The discovery came at the exact center of the summer and of the story, and it came, as the cruelest things do, dressed as a kindness. Nora had decided to surprise him. She had saved for 3 weeks. Small money, real money, skipped lunches and a tutoring job she'd taken on the side, because the annual showcase at the Arts Center was coming, and she wanted to hire a proper musician to headline it. A draw, someone who could fill the room and bring in the donations the program lived or died on. And she had thought, with the particular joy of giving work to someone you love, "I'll pay Leo. A real fee. He needs it, and he's wonderful, and I get to watch the kids watch him." She had the envelope in her bag, cash counted twice, and she went to find him to offer it. And because he'd mentioned he sometimes did paperwork at the restaurant in the afternoons before service, she went, for the first time since the date, back to Marchetti's. She went in the wrong door. Not the grand front with the butter-colored light, but the service entrance off the side street, propped open against the summer heat. And she stepped into the bright clatter of a professional kitchen at 4 in the afternoon, and stopped. Because everyone in it had stopped, the way a room stops when the person who pays for the room walks in. Except they hadn't stopped for her. Leo was at the pass. He was not in the worn jacket. He was in a clean shirt with the sleeves turned back, a sheaf of papers in one hand and a pen behind his ear. And the head chef was deferring to him while a man in a suit waited with a folder. The kitchen heat rolled out through the propped door, oil and rosemary and scorched butter. And under it, the cold mineral smell of the walk-in. As Nora stood frozen by the door, she heard the chef say, "The Tidewater people need an answer on the basement studio by Friday, and the Block Association wants you at the—" And Leo said, "Push the Block Association to next week, sign the studio, and tell them Mr. Marchetti said the rent stays flat for the old tenants or there's no deal." He signed without looking, the easy, automatic signature of a man who signed all day. Nora's eyes traveled up, past the pass, to the wall behind it, where she had never been, where the staff corridor began. There, framed in a row that went on and on down the hall, were gold records. Records with his name on the little brass plates. Tidewater Records. A photograph of this building's grand opening with a younger Leo cutting a ribbon, a magazine cover, and an article whose headline she could read from 20 feet away because the universe wanted her to. The Quiet King of the Block, how Leo Marchetti built an empire and stayed off the radar. The envelope of cash was very heavy in her bag. Theo saw her first. Theo, who had her $60 in a frame. His face did the whole story before anyone spoke. The wide eyes, the flick to Leo, the dawning horror of a boy who realizes he has been keeping a secret from exactly the wrong person. And the small sound he made, or maybe it was the change in the room, made Leo look up from his signature and across the bright, clattering kitchen, over the heads of the staff who answered to him. Leo Marchetti saw Nora Bellamy standing in the service door with an envelope of saved-up cash in her bag to hire the broke musician, and every drop of color went out of his face, and the papers in his hand were suddenly the only thing holding him up. "Nora," he said. She did not run. She would be a little proud of that, later, in the wreckage. That she did not run. That she stood in the doorway of his enormous secret and let it land. She looked at the gold records, and the suit with the folder, and the chef, gone carefully blank, and Theo's stricken face. And she did the math. The fast, ugly math the poor never unlearn. And the number it came to was not in dollars. "The bread's free," she said. Her voice came out steady and far away. "You told me to always check. I checked the wrong thing." "Let me—" He came around the pass, and the staff melted backward to give him the room he owned. And that, the melting, the deference, the whole machine reorganizing itself around him as he crossed the floor, that was almost worse than the records. "Nora, I can explain it, just— Not here, please. Come— You let me give Theo my $60. She was not crying. The not crying was costing her everything. "In your restaurant. To your waiter. You let me read the cheap side of the menu. You let me mend your jacket. I brought you soup, Leo, on the bus, across the whole city. I have an envelope in my bag right now. I saved for 3 weeks. I came here to offer you a job because I thought you needed the money." She heard her own voice crack on the last word and hated it. Was it funny? No, because that's the joke my sister told. That's the exact joke. The starving artist and the soft sister, one bad night to laugh about later. She set it up as a prank, Leo. Now the tears came, and she let them, furious. "And I thought of everyone in the world, you were the one person who wasn't laughing." "I wasn't. You were the one person." She turned and walked back out the service door into the white afternoon, past the bins and the cardboard, the way the help goes out, and Leo Marchetti stood in the kitchen he owned, in front of the staff he paid, and could not move. Because the man who had built half a block on never being fooled had just been seen, finally and totally, as exactly the kind of person his father had warned him about. The kind who counts what you're worth and pretends not to. Except that he was both halves of his father's lesson at once. The fool and the one who builds the wall. And the wall had been the foolishness all along. The dark night was not loud. The worst ones never are. Nora did not rage to anyone. She went home to her apartment with the radiator that knocked and the window that stuck, and she put the envelope of cash on the table. Money she could not now give to anyone. Money that had been love and was now evidence. And she sat with the summer dusk coming gold through the stuck window, and she let the lie finish arriving. All of it. Every corner. Maybe he had been amused the whole time. Maybe she had been a long entertainment. The soft girl who fussed over a man who could buy her building without noticing, who darned a button on a jacket he wore on purpose, who hauled soup across a city to a man with a private chef. Maybe the late sets in the worn jacket were exactly what they looked like. A rich man's game. A test. And she had been a contestant who didn't know she was on the show, performing her poverty and her kindness for an audience of one who already knew the ending. Her father had been a man with nothing, who loved with everything, and she had built her whole self in his image, had decided long ago that the soft thing, the giving thing, was not weakness, but the only wealth that couldn't be faked. And Leo had taken that, the truest thing about her, and let it run for laughs. Sloane was right. That was the part that hollowed her out on the gold dusk. Sloane had been right all along. There were people who counted, and people who pretended not to, and the second kind were just better at it. And Nora had given her last $60 and her summer and the soft middle of herself to the best pretender she had ever met. She did not know that across the city, he was sitting on the floor of an apartment with too much glass, not playing a guitar the way Maggie had promised he would not play it, and that the silence had already started. She did not know that he had spent the evening writing her name on the back of an envelope of his own, and not being able to write a single word after it that wasn't a wall. The two of them sat in two silences on two sides of the same summer dark, and the thing about a dark night is that the people in it always believe, with total conviction, that they are alone in it, which is the lie at the very bottom, the one under all the others. The hardest part was Thursday, because Thursday was Priya. Nora went to the art center because she would not let the children pay for what the adults had broken. And she taught the lesson, and her hands did the chords while the rest of her stood somewhere far off watching. And at the end, Priya packed her too big guitar into its case and looked up and asked the question Nora had been dreading all week, the simple, flat question of a child for whom absence is the only real arithmetic. "Where's Leo?" Leo had to... The lie stuck. Nora had had enough of lies to last her several lives. "Leo and I had a disagreement. A grown-up one. I don't think he's going to be teaching for a while." Priya considered this with the terrible seriousness she brought to everything. "Was it about money?" she said. Not really a question, because Priya was 9 in this neighborhood, and knew that the grown-up disagreements were always, underneath, about money. "My mum says all the big fights are about money." "Your mum's mostly right." Nora crouched to her level, the linoleum cold through her knees. But this one was about the opposite, actually. This one was about somebody having too much and not saying so. She heard how strange it sounded, and watched Priya hear it too. "It doesn't matter. You keep practicing the change between two true notes. That part's still true. That part doesn't go away when people do." Priya nodded, unconvinced, and shouldered her guitar. And at the door she turned. and delivered the verdict of the young, which is always the one that draws blood, because it has no diplomacy in it yet. He was a good teacher. You should let him come back. Good teachers are hard to get. And she left, and Nora sat down on the cold floor of the empty music room, with the heeled piano humming faintly in the heat, and finally cried. Not the furious tears of the kitchen doorway, but the small worn-out ones, because a 9-year-old had just told her, without knowing it, that the question was not whether Leo had wronged her, he had, but whether a true thing could survive having been wrapped in a false one. And she did not know the answer, and the not knowing was the whole of the dark. Across the city, Leo was not playing the guitar, exactly as Maggie had promised he would not, and Maggie, who had buried 2 of his illusions and had no patience left for the 3rd, came up to the too-much-glass apartment, uninvited, with a key she'd had for 15 years, and found him on the floor, with the guitar across his lap and his hands nowhere near the strings. "There it is," she said, setting down a paper bag of the soup he wouldn't eat. "The silence. I told you I'd be the one who had to listen to it." She sat in the one chair he never used. "You want to tell me she was after the money? Go on. Tell me the thing your father told you. Tell me she counted." "She didn't count." His voice was a ruin. "She gave Theo $60. She brought me soup on a bus. She did the future out loud on a roof she thought I was watering for somebody else. She never counted, Maggie, not once, not for 1 second, and I knew it. And I let her keep thinking I needed her to count so I could watch her not do it." He pressed the heels of his hands into his eyes. "I made the kindest person I've ever met feel like a fool for being kind. That's what I built. Half a block and a wall and the one machine on earth that turns being loved into evidence." Maggie let him have it for a moment, the way you let a burn run under cold water. Then, dry, merciless, kind. "Your father was a frightened man who taught you to be frightened in a more expensive currency, and you've spent 10 years calling it wisdom. That woman fixed the button on his jacket. You know what you do with a thing like that, Leo. You don't deserve it. Nobody deserves it. You just try to be worth the trouble it took her to thread the needle." She stood. The soup steamed between them, untouched, going from gold to a skin of grey. Outside the high window, the summer light had gone long and amber across the floorboards. "You can't buy your way back in. You know that, or you'd have done it already, and she'd have thrown it in the river. So the only thing you've got left is the thing you've never once done in your whole, rich life." She went to the door. "Show up with nothing, and ask for nothing. See if you survive it. I did, after your mother. It's the only door out of a room like this, and it only opens from the inside, and it costs everything, and it's free." She left, the way she said everything, with the last word. And Leo sat with the cold soup and the silent guitar, and understood that for the first time, he had a problem that none of his guys could solve. He came to the arts center because it was the only ground that was hers. That was the first thing he got right in a long time, and he got it right by accident, the way he'd gotten everything right and wrong all summer. He did not send a car, did not send the suit with the folder, did not send money, which was the one apology she could not forgive, and the only language he had ever trusted. He came himself, on the Thursday, in the worn jacket, which was either the most honest or the most cowardly thing he could have worn. And he stood in the doorway of the music room, where she was alone, stacking chairs, and Nora's hands stopped on a chair. "You're not teaching today," she said, not turning. "The kids are gone." "I didn't come for the kids." "Then you came to the wrong building. There's nothing here for you, Leo. Nothing free, nothing broken you can fix without me noticing this time." She set the chair down hard. "How does a guy like you even... Do you know a guy for this? Is there a guy?" "Nora." "Don't." She turned. He looked terrible, which gave her no satisfaction at all, which made it worse. "Just tell me one true thing. You owe me exactly one true thing, and I want to choose it." She folded her arms over the soft middle of herself. Why? And here, on the worst ground of his life, in front of a heeled piano and a face-down photograph he didn't know the meaning of, Leo Marchetti did the only brave thing the summer had left him, which was to not reach for the wall. "Because you were kind to the nobody," he said, "and I'd stopped believing the nobody was worth being kind to." His voice was not steady. He let it not be steady. "I built all of it. The records, the block, all of it. After a woman cried about money that didn't exist, and I cleared it, and found out the tears were the rent she paid for the access. My father taught me there are two kinds of people, and the second kind are just better at hiding it. And I believed him, Nora. I believed him for 10 years. And I played those late sets in this jacket to prove it, to watch people fail. And they always failed, every one of them. And it was a kind of company, being right about people. And then you read the cheap side of the menu so I wouldn't read it alone." He stopped, started again, lower, and the worn jacket made him look exactly like what he was claiming not to be. "I didn't tell you because the second I told you, I'd never know again whether you were kind to me or to the money. You were the only proof I had that the nobody mattered. And I was a coward, and I let you give Theo your $60. And there is no version of this where I'm not exactly the thing your sister said I was. I know that. I'm not here to be forgiven. I'm here because you asked me for one true thing once, on a corner, and I gave you a lie, and I owed you the true one to the door." The room was very quiet. The donated piano sat between them like a third person. "That's a good speech," Nora said finally, and her voice was wrecked and even. "It's the truest thing you've ever said to me, and it's a good speech, and I believe every word of it." She picked up another chair. "And I still can't trust it, Leo, because you taught me how. You spent a whole summer showing me how easy it is to perform the exact thing someone needs to see. So how does anyone tell your true thing from your test?" She set the chair on the stack, and her hands were shaking. "Go home, please. I have chairs." He went. That was the second thing he got right. He went when she asked, instead of buying his way back in, and it cost him more than the studio and the block and the whole shining empire to walk out of that low building with the dead-key piano and leave her with the chairs. And he did it anyway, because for the first time in his life, he understood that there are some things you cannot fix with a guy. Sloane came to find Nora that weekend, and it was the second time Nora had ever seen her sister's public face slip, and the first time on purpose. She did not sweep in. She knocked, on the door of the apartment with the knocking radiator, a place she had visited exactly twice in 5 years, and disliked both times. And she stood in the hall in flat shoes Nora had never seen her wear, holding nothing, which was its own strangeness. Sloane always held something, a glass, a phone, a verdict. "I found out who he is," Sloane said. "Leo, I went and found out. 3 weeks ago, after the art center, after what you said to me." She came in when Nora stepped back, and she did not look around the small apartment with the old assessing scorn. She just stood. "I was going to use it. I want you to know that, because I'm done lying to you in small ways to feel large. I found out he owns Marchetti's and Tidewater and half of Restaurant Row, and I was going to come here and tell you and watch your face, because you'd said I'd never been loved in a way I could trust, and I wanted to prove that you were the fool, not me. I wanted it so badly, Nora." She sat, uninvited, on the edge of the lumpy couch and put her perfect hands in her lap. "And then I couldn't. I drove here 3 times and couldn't knock. Do you know why?" "No," said Nora, who did not, and who was using her 1 and her 2 of the single-word answers very carefully this week. "Because you'd already found out, and you weren't relieved the way I'd have been. You weren't calculating what it meant for your future the way I would have, the way I do every hour of every day, Nora. I can't stop." Her voice did the thing the shoulders had done in the music room, the thing she never let it do. "You were heartbroken, because you didn't want his block. You wanted the man with nothing." She pressed her perfect hands flat against her knees, holding herself together by the seams, and I realized I had spent my whole life being right about money, and I have never once in my life been loved the way you were prepared to love a man you thought was broke, and that you were right in that ugly hallway, all the way down. I've never been loved in a way I could trust, because I've never let anyone near me without the price tag facing out." She stopped. "Dad used to say, 'The bread's free, always check.' I hated him for it. I hated that we were the family that had to check." She reached into her bag, the only thing she'd brought, and took out a small, flat object and set it on the table next to the envelope of cash. Nora still hadn't moved, and pushed it across with one finger, the way you surrender. "I kept this for 15 years. I told everyone I threw it out because it embarrassed me. It's the only thing of his I have. I think it should be yours. You're the one who plays." It was a guitar pick, worn nearly translucent at one edge from a thumb that had moved across it 10,000 times. Their father's. The cheap kind you bought in bags of 12, and on the back, in faded marker in his hand, it said, "Walter B." And under it, the family joke, the thing he said before every cheap show on every small stage. "Always check." Nora picked it up. She read the line on the back. The afternoon light came gold and unbearable through the stuck window. "This cost you something," she said, low, turning the pick. "Bringing this, telling me you were going to use it and didn't." "It cost me being right," Sloane said. "Turns out I was overcharged for it my whole life." A breath, wet, almost a laugh, the first true one Nora had ever heard from her. "I broke it off with Preston, by the way. Yesterday. He asked me what I'd inherited before he asked me how I was, on 3 separate occasions. And I used to find that reassuring. And now it just sounds like a man checking whether the bread is free." She stood. She had given up the rich match and the high public face and the lifelong religion of being right, and she had carried her father's pick across the city to the sister she'd tried to humiliate. And she did it without asking for anything back. Which is the only kind of apology that counts. "I'm not telling you to forgive Leo. God knows, I'm the last person. I'm telling you, I was wrong about what people are worth. Both of you. All of it. I'm sorry, Nora. I'm so sorry I made you check." She went to the door and paused, and the dry register came back, but gentle now. A sister's, not a blade's. "He's an idiot, your musician. But he's the right kind of idiot. He came in the jacket. A man playing a game comes in the suit." She left. Nora sat for a long time with her father's pick in one hand and the envelope of cash in the other. The two halves of everything she believed about money and love. And out the stuck window, the long summer evening went down gold, over a city where, across the water, a man sat on a floor of too much glass, and finally, after 11 days of silence, picked up a guitar. She found him where he started, which is how she knew. Not at the restaurant, and not at the glass apartment whose address she'd never been given, because broke men don't have addresses like that. She found him in the park, on the warmest evening of a summer that was nearly over, at the chained upright piano under the plane trees with the buzzing E. In the worn jacket, playing badly on purpose, around the dead key, for a scatter of strangers who had no idea the man at the public piano could have bought the park. He had a hat upturned on the bench beside him. There were a few coins in it. He was, for the first time in 10 years, actually busking. Actually a tip musician, having given the late sets and the test and the wall the only funeral he knew how to give them, which was to go and be, in public, with nothing. The nobody he'd been so afraid wasn't worth loving. Nora stood at the edge of the little crowd until he saw her. His hands stopped on the keys. The E buzzed and died. She came forward through the strangers, and she did not say it was all right, because it wasn't. And she did not say she forgave him, because she wasn't sure yet. And those would have been declarations, and she had learned this summer, from the best teacher and the worst, how cheap a declaration is next to a thing that costs you. Instead, she reached into her pocket, where she'd carried it across the whole city, and she took out a single, worn, translucent guitar pick, with a dead man's name on it. And she set it gently in the upturned hat, on top of the coins, the most valuable thing she owned, given to a man she had every reason never to trust again. "For your night," she said. The words she'd given Theo, the words her father gave waiters. "You were lovely to us. People aren't always lovely back." Leo looked at the pick in the hat. He read the back of it. Walter B. Always check. He understood. She watched him understand. That she had just done to him the exact thing that had undone him at the start, given a near stranger her last and truest thing without checking whether she could afford the loss. Except that this time, she knew precisely who he was, knew the records and the block and the empire, knew the whole shape of the deception, and gave it anyway, with her eyes open, which is the only gift that can ever heal a man who taught himself that gifts are tests. "I can't take this," he said, hoarse. "I know," she said. "That's how you know it's real. The things you can't take." She sat down beside him on the bench, not touching, the way they'd sat at the chained piano in June. "I trust the speech now, by the way. I didn't in the music room. It was a good speech, and I couldn't tell it from a test. But you came in the jacket, Leo. Twice. And you went home when I asked you to instead of buying the building out from under my heartbreak. And you're sitting in a public park busking like a man doing penance, with my father's pick about to ruin you." She almost smiled. "A man playing a game comes in the suit. My sister told me that. She's a different person now. It's a whole summer of impossible things." He turned the pick over once in his fingers, the old habit, thumb finding the worn edge. And this was the apology with the real cost, the asset he sacrificed, the power he surrendered. He set it back in her open palm and closed her fingers over it, the way she'd closed Theo's. "Then I'll earn it. Not buy it, earn it. I'll come Thursdays. I'll teach Priya her bar chords. I'll sit on the cheap side of every menu for the rest of my life if you'll let me. And I will never again, as long as I live, let you wonder whether the warmth was for the money. Because there isn't going to be any money in this between us, ever. Not from me to you." His thumb moved over her closed knuckles. The fountain hissed somewhere behind them, and a child laughed on the path, and the guitar lay quiet across his knee. "We're going to be two broke musicians, and I'm going to give the rest of it away faster than it comes in. The studio and the block and Tidewater. Into your dead key pianos. Into kids like Priya. Into rooms where the bread is free. And you can audit me every single day. You taught me there's a kind of wealth that can't be faked. I want to learn it. I'm a slow student, and I have a wall to unbuild. And I know a guy who can help with that." He took a breath. "It's me. I'm the guy. I was always the guy." Nora laughed, finally. The laugh he'd surprised out of her at a small back table a whole summer ago. Wet and helpless, and entirely real. And she said, "I knew it. I always knew there was no guy." And the strangers had drifted off, and the plane trees moved in the warm dark, and somewhere a kid went by, trailing too much bass. And Leo Marchetti put his roughened hands back on the yellowed keys, and played, going around the dead notes the way you do. And Nora rested her head on the worn shoulder of a jacket she had mended with her own thread, and the pick stayed in her closed hand. Hers, theirs, the cheapest, most expensive thing in the city. The showcase still had to happen, because the program lived or died on the donations it brought, and Nora ran it the way she ran everything, on borrowed chairs and refused favors. Except this time, the headliner came for free, and not because anyone called in a guy. Leo played it in the worn jacket, on the donated upright with the once-dead keys, and he did not announce who he was. And the room filled because Priya's mother had told every parent on the block that the kids' Thursday teacher was playing, and the kids brought their 2 big guitars and played the 3 chords and the clean change between them before he ever touched a key. So that by the time Leo sat down, the room already understood what it was there to value. The donations that night came small and many, 20s and 10s from people who checked their own pockets first. And they were enough. And Nora stood at the back, counting them into the jar with her own hands, and did not let Leo so much as round a number up, because the whole point was that the program survive on what it was actually worth to the people who loved it. And it did. By the next summer, the art centre had heat that worked, and a wall of new instruments, and no one could ever quite trace the donations, which arrived under names the front desk couldn't read and refused all thanks, except that Nora could trace every one of them, because Leo showed her the books on the 1st of every month and sat while she checked, and she checked, because their father was right that you always do, and because checking, when you already trust, is just another way of paying attention to someone you love. He never bought her anything she could not have bought herself, which at first was almost nothing, and then, as her program grew and the city noticed the teacher who'd somehow filled a low building with music, was a little more, and then a little more, and the not buying became their whole shy fortune. They were married in the park by the chained pianos on the warmest evening of that next summer, and the donated upright with the once-dead keys was wheeled out under the plane trees for the occasion, and Priya played the 3 chords and the dignity of a clean change between them, badly and gloriously, like a beautiful catastrophe, like a washing machine full of bells. Sloane was there, in flat shoes, holding nothing, and she cried in a way she could finally trust. And afterward she told a stranger at the small reception, with the dry register that was hers but kinder now, that her sister had married the right kind of idiot, the kind who came in the jacket, and that she had personally been wrong about the price of nearly everything, and that she was, at 30, only just now learning to check. Theo came too. He bought the framed $60 and tried to give it back, finally, as a wedding gift, and Nora pressed his hands closed over it, the way she had on the first night, and told him to keep it, to take care of his own, that you take care of each other or nobody does. And Theo, who was a manager now at a restaurant where the bread was famously, defiantly free, kept it on the wall by the pass, where every new waiter could see it, and never quite understood the story, only that it mattered. And on the back table at Marchetti's, under the stair where the candlelight had to work hardest, there was a small brass plate now, the kind that went under the gold records in the hall, except this one was screwed to the wood of an ordinary table, and it did not have a name on it or a number of records sold. It had 4 words, in the hand of a man who had finally learned what they were worth. The family joke, and the only financial advice that had ever been true. The thing a poor man tells his daughters, and a rich man spends his whole life trying to afford. The bread's free. Always check.